Hi everyone, this is just a quick video taking you through the writing section of the functional skills course. Now this is actually a follow-on video from our one last week where we looked at the writing and the reading elements, and now we're actually going to take a look and go through the writing one in more detail, have a look at the question again and go through how to respond to it appropriately. So if you haven't done so already, please can you like and subscribe, it really helps us out when you do so. We're now going to go ahead and look at this writing question and see how we need to address the question. So if you look at the images below, I want you to think about the kind of themes or topics that we looked at in the last video. So you can see there that we have school, you can see there by the chairs, you can see there by the Scrabble tiles that it refers to rules, and we also have a lovely beach setting in the background. So it's important that when you think about your functional skills that you explore as many different themes as possible, because we really don't know which theme or which topic is going to come up in your actual exam. In this lesson, we're going to try to achieve the following objectives. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to recall the key details for the writing assessment. We're then going to try to understand what makes the response successful, and then you'll have to go away and apply your understanding to an exam style question. Now what we're going to do is just have a quick look at the writing assessment overview. So first of all, for the writing assessment, you'll be asked to complete 2 tasks. Now these 2 tasks will need to be completed within the same sitting, and you'll be doing it as part of the same exam. Task 1 is going to be worth 21 marks, and task 2 is going to be worth 15 marks. Now what a lot of students struggle with is timing when they come to this exam, and the main thing to remember with this one is that you should aim to spend 35 minutes on task 1 and about 25 minutes on task 2. So just make sure that you're spending the appropriate amount of time for each question and the marks that are available. You'll need to feel confident with different forms of writing. So whenever I actually put on an assessment for the writing part of the course, a lot of people do get a bit nervous. They hope that a leaflet or a blog or something like that doesn't come up. And now if that is the case, that means that you need to go back and you need to spend some more time revising those key elements. So the main ones that they're going to be include things like articles, emails, letters, blogs, an eyewitness testimony, leaflets, reports, and speeches. Now all of these will be things that you will encounter as well when you're doing the reading assessment as well, so it should be quite easy for you to get a good grasp of them as you progress throughout your functional skills course. Writing assessment. Look at the writing question below and attempt the challenges that follow. So here we have our question on the left hand side. Again, this is the same one that we followed on from our previous video. We looked at it and now we're going to go through it in a bit more depth. So it says then, your friend or relative is thinking about taking their children out of school during term time but are worried they will get in trouble. Write them an email advising them on what to consider. In your email you should discuss the pros and cons of taking their children on holiday during term time, have an appropriate tone to give advice, use a range of DeForest techniques to support your writing, and have high quality spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now whenever you face a question like this, it's important to think about how do you approach the question and to actually pinpoint the main areas that you need to talk about in your response. So the first thing you should do is identify the TAP of the exam question, and if you're not too sure what we mean by that, we mean the topic, the audience and the purpose. So if we think first of all about the topic would be taking their children out of school during term time. That would be the main focus. Then the audience, whenever we say the audience, we mean who is this going to be aimed at, who are we talking to or writing to. It says there at the start of the question that it is a friend or a relative. Now this is a really important thing to consider when you're doing your writing assessment. Think about the kind of language you would use when you're talking to a friend or a relative and how that might be different from, let's say, talking to an employer. And then the final thing we need to consider is the purpose. So why are we writing? What has actually caused us to put pen to paper in the first place other than the fact that we need to pass this exam. So the purpose here would be about giving them some advice, because you can see there after it says an email with advising them on what to consider. So the TAP can all be understood if we just look at the first part of this question, and then you need to think about the broader aspect of the question and the kind of things we need to do to make sure we get a good mark in the exam. So the next thing we're thinking about is what kind of tone would you need to use for this audience. Again, as we identified when we went through the challenge and identified the TAP, we know that it's to a friend or a relative. So our tone generally is going to be a bit more informal. So you can use language like colloquial language or slang if that is what you'd normally use when talking to a friend or a relative. Mega challenge. Use everything you have learned in your reading assessment to plan and write your response for the writing question. So if you haven't checked out the previous video, the video actually went through some really important information about the kind of rules and the kind of fines that are put in place if people do take their children away on holiday during term time. So what you can do is you can go back, you can watch the video where we went through the reading assessment, use the information that we gained there, and then apply it to the writing question as well. Look at the example below. How successful is the response, and what needs to be improved? So what we've got here is we've got a typical student example. As I go through, I want you to be thinking about the bullet points that are actually defined in the question. Again, if you need to pause the video and go back and double check them, please feel free to do so. And I want you to think, does it actually meet the criteria? Is it something that you would actually decide would be something that is successful, or something that needs to be changed or adapted? So it says then, "Hi mate, I've heard you're thinking about taking your kids out of school during term time. Are you actually insane? I know it can be cheap to grab a holiday during this time, but what about the fines? You need to stop being stupid and listen to me. You might think this is a good idea, but listen to someone who is smarter than you. School is important, and you need to let your children have their full education so they can get the most out of their time in school. If you want to do something with your kids, why not do something fun on the weekend instead?" So if you want to pause the video here, if you want to go through it in a bit more detail, please feel free to do so. As well, you can try and stretch and challenge yourself and go through the example and try to identify how many DeForest techniques have been used. Now, if you're not too sure what we mean by these techniques, DeForest is the acronym that we use to actually remember some of the key language devices, and we've gone through that in more detail in previous videos as well. Class feedback. Check your understanding against the teacher's feedback. So now on the left hand side, what we've got is we've got the response that we just read through, and now what we're going to see is the actual feedback given by the teacher when this was handed in. So first of all, the what went well. So this is indicated here by going www. The responses started to use some positive examples of informal language. So that means that it's talking in the way that you'd expect someone to talk if they're sending an email to a friend or a relative. And if we look at this, we can actually see this here with words like mate. Okay, mate is informal. It's a colloquial term, and it's to show friendship. Okay, also things like kids is actually informal, when the proper word is children as well. There are some examples of DeForest techniques in the response. Now, whenever you get something like this, it's important to look closely at the feedback given by the teacher. And if we really think about the word some, now this word here implies that they may have used one or two examples of DeForest techniques, but they haven't used a lot. They haven't used many. So it might imply that although they have used some, which is good, we would like to see more if this was to get higher marks in the exam. So if we think about the DeForest techniques that have been used, the first one that comes is the rhetorical question, where it says, "Are you actually insane?" Rhetorical question. If we look again though, this rhetorical question is used not just once, but at least 3 times. But what about the fines? That's number 2. And we've got another one towards the end as well. Why not do something at the weekend instead? Now, it's a good idea to use your DeForest techniques, but if you're only using the one technique over and over again, that is showing the examiner that you have some understanding of the language techniques needed, but you don't have a wide understanding of it. It's quite a narrow understanding, so we need to make sure that if you've used a DeForest technique 1, maybe 2 times, try and think about using a different one just to change it up and make it seem a bit more appealing to whoever's reading your response. Now we're going to move on to how this could be improved. So you can see here in the blue highlight we've got HTIP, and that stands for how to improve. So the first thing that I'd flag up with this, or the teacher would flag up with this, is the tone of the response is very aggressive and derogatory, and that means that we're talking down to someone, and that isn't really the right way to go, because if you're trying to advise someone, they're not really going to listen to you if you're being negative, if you're being aggressive. Straight away, naturally, we shut off, we think this person is being rude, and we're less likely to listen to what they've got to say. And the first time this comes up is actually in that rhetorical question where it says, "Are you actually insane?" So quite an aggressive, horrible thing to say, a very derogatory thing to say, especially if you're talking to a friend or a relative. Also words like stupid. Now if we just think about the actual implication of that word, stupid is a word that can be very emotionally painful for people to hear, so you want to avoid words like that. So if you do want to actually write your own response, it might be worthwhile to look at this example, take some of the things that work well, and see what you can actually change and adapt in order to make it better. We've also got an example where it says, listen to someone who is smarter than you. So again, being very derogatory and talking down to the person. So we're not really getting across the message we want to get across. If anything, it's just coming across as being quite insulting to whoever's reading this response. The learner has not used sophisticated vocabulary or punctuation. So again, some of the words that have been used are very simple, and there's no more advanced punctuation other than the fact that they've used a comma and a rhetorical question. In order to get a really good mark within your assessment, I'd like to see things like colons, semicolons and parentheses at the very least, to try and make sure that you uplift your response and you show your examiner that you have a good grasp of this. And the responses use a limited amount of DeForest techniques. Again, we've already spoke about that, but if we have a look at a bit more detail, there are also some big spelling and grammatical errors as well. Now, what a lot of people get mixed up on are things like homophones and homonyms. So a lot of the time, words that sound the same are often spelt differently. So we have words like your, and your, there, and there, which of course are 3 different words, but often used incorrectly. So we've got the your over here. So it's important, and you need to let your children. Now, when it's you apostrophe re, this actually means you are. So it wouldn't be the appropriate one. What it should be instead is y-o-u-r. Again, a similar mistake has been made with the word there. This word actually means they are. So instead of using it like that, it should be T-H-E-I-R, showing a possession. It's their education that they need, not they are full education. So little things like this, easy mistakes to make, and they're things that a lot of people miss out, especially when you go back and you reread it. Okay, so it's important that when you do your writing response, that you take the time just to read back over what you've wrote and to come back and assess what you've done. Use the success criteria to write your own response. So now that we've actually looked at an example and we can see that there's some elements that work well and some elements that would definitely improve, use this kind of criteria to help you to stay on track. So in order to pass the writing assessment, you need to write in the appropriate form for the question. So if it asks you to write in an email, you need to lay it out as an email. The same goes for a letter or anything else that you've asked to write in. Use the correct language, so formal or informal. So the student actually was very successful in the fact that they're able to use informal language. However, they went a bit too informal and actually was quite aggressive. Another thing to pay attention to is if this response asks them to write to an employer, or let's say someone who's working in the government, then the language wouldn't have been appropriate. Okay, so you have to know the difference between formal and informal language. Use a range of DeForest techniques. Now, whenever we say a range, we mean you should try to use 3 to 5 techniques and try to make sure that you're using different ones each time. Don't always use the same ones because it shows you only have a limited understanding of the language that is needed. And the final one, use spelling, punctuation and grammar in a clear and sophisticated manner. Now with this one, this is the most important one for me because often it gets neglected. It's really important that you go back, you double check, and you make sure that your punctuation is correct, you spell all the words correctly, and that you're trying to actually show that you have a good grasp and understanding of English. Now if we think back to the actual writing assessment, here is our question. The only other thing we need to think about now are these bullet points. So the reason why these bullet points are here is that the examiner is actually giving you a guide and actually telling you what you need to focus on in your response. So in your email you should. Now this is what it will say. In the exam it would use the word should, but we want to ignore that. Rather than saying should, we mean must really. So discuss the pros and cons of taking their children on holiday during term time, have an appropriate tone to give advice, use a range of DeForest techniques to support your writing, and have high quality spelling, grammar and punctuation. If you do all that, if you go back, if you check, if you review your writing, you'll be absolutely fine with the writing assessment. So if you want to go away now, and if you want to actually use the things that we went through today to actually have a go at your writing assessment, that would be really fantastic. And if you'd like some feedback, you can contact us. Happy to mark any work people's done and provide you with any support and help going forward. If you'd like any additional support, then new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, give us a like and leave us a comment below and subscribe to our page, and we'll try to get back to you if you need any support or help. If you can't find anything on our channel, please do check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks ever so much for listening guys, and all the best with your work in the future. Goodbye.